Hey guys, and welcome back to another Big Rook Games tutorial. In this series we are going through Call of Duty Zombies and remaking it in Unity 3D and providing all the assets for free. And this is what it's going to look like when we are finished. We have our zombies coming out of our spawn points and we have our character controller. So let's jump right back into it. From the last time that we left off, I did add some updates to the character controller and I released a video on what I did there and how I did that. I'll link that into the description and I'll provide the character controller in the description as well. And basically the only difference on that controller is I added the exosuit boost movements from Call of Duty Advanced Warfare. I'll show you what that looks like right now in our play screen. Basically it has a double jump and a boost or a slide. So you can slide. I think this will be kind of cool to use in Call of Duty Zombies. We'll have to modify a few things so you can't just jump on top of an object and hide, but I think it'll add a big element to the series, and especially in a small map like this we need to use the height of the map as well so we can get more out of it. So today we are going to add zombie enemies into the scene and we are going to spawn them at the spawn points that we created last time. We are going to add a NavMesh to our scene so that the zombies can navigate around the scene when they're following you. And last we will instantiate the zombies into our scene using a timer and randomizing their spawn points. So first let's grab the zombie asset that we're going to use. We have a video on how we built the zombie asset and currently it has a walk and an idle. We'll add more states to it for the animation, but right now I'm just going to pull the prefab directly from that other video. So here's our zombie asset from the other video. If you pull it into the scene, you can see it's a basic zombie in a T-pose, and there's an animation controller to put onto the zombie that will control his idle and walk speed, or animation rather. So if you drag the zombie animation controller into the character's animator controller and push play, you should have a default state of idle, and you can see he's just idle right now. He does have a walk animation as well. And next we're going to add a NavMesh and bake it into our scene. So to do that you want to open the navigation window, which go to Window and Navigation, and it will pop up, and click on the Bake tab at the top. And what this does is creates a map for where the player or whatever nav agents that you put into the map, it tells them where they can go and how they can seek you. So it will walk around items that are too tall to walk over, and it finds the best path to the player that it's looking for. Doing this is really simple. If you go into the Bake tab, and the radius is how far away from walls that an object can get, and 0.25 is probably fine. Height is how high an open path must be for an object to go through it. So this is important in our case because we want the zombies to be able to walk through the spawn windows. So right here it's less than 2 units, so I put it at 1.5. and you'll see how this affects the map in a second. And then the step height, that is how high over an object that the NavMesh agent can walk. Right now I have it at 0.9 so that they can walk over these ledges, and all you have to do is click the Bake at the bottom right, and once you click that it will show you a NavMesh map, and you can see that it goes around the walls and it shows the paths that you can take. And you can see it has blue areas on any flat surface, and it connects those surfaces if the step in between the surfaces is less than 0.9. So they'll be able to walk up the stairs and they will be able to walk through the windows and walk over the gaps that we see in the scene. So now we just need to tell the enemy to seek the player. So we're going to add a script to the zombie that we imported. So in the prefab that you have, you can create one easily by dragging the zombie in the scene down into a folder. We want to add a script. Actually, first let's add the NavMesh agent. So in your prefab, click Add Component, and you can just search for Nav, and you have NavMesh agent. And there's a couple properties here that are important. Basically, it will put a capsule collider around your object, and you can see the capsule collider around our zombie here. It's a little big, so we want the radius down to 0.2 works. The speed, they're going to be walking pretty slow, so 0.25, and you can mess with that to whatever speed you want them to be at. The height, I'm going to drop it down a little bit to 1.5. And now we have our NavMesh agent. So now we can tell, through scripting, we can tell the enemy to walk and seek the player. So next we'll add a script to the zombie. If you add component, search for script, and I'm doing a C# script. And I'm going to name it enemy controller. Double click that to bring up mono develop. And we have our empty script here. Now, in the future this will get a lot more complex, but today we are just going to have the enemy seek the player. So we need a reference to both the NavMesh agent and the player transform so we know where to go. So I'm going to add NavMesh agent, nav, and transform, player position. And then I'm going to change the start to awake. And we are going to reference both of those variables. So we have our nav_get component, NavMesh agent, going to add the player position equals GameObject.findGameObject with tag player.transform. And if you haven't changed the tag of the player object, it's pretty easy. Just find your controller and up in the inspector, click the tag player. So in the update function, I am going to have them seek the player, and later we will put this in an if statement to determine if the player is alive or what state the zombie is in. So it's not always seeking, but for now we're just going to seek. And to do that, you access the NavMesh agent variable and use set destination and simply put in the player position. So we use our variable that we have, and it takes a vector 3, so put in the player position, not position. And this might be confusing, so I'm going to take out the position part of the player. So we just have player.position. Make sure you change all of those. So now we have the update function telling the NavMesh agent to seek the player. And that's all we need to do for the model to move in our scene. So if you save that and go back to the Unity scene and click play, you should see the zombie seeking the player. Now next we'll add an animation so it's walking. So if we open the object's animation controller, we can see that there's two states in here, idle and zombie walk. And in the transitions between them, we have a condition where speed is greater than 0.1. So in our script, we just need to tell the animation controller when our speed is 0.1 or above 0.1 so it can transition to the walk animation. Going back to our script, we need a reference to the animator, and I'm going to assign that in the awake function. Get component in parent, and we want the animator. And in the update function, we just need to tell it to update the player speed. And there is a variable inside of a NavMesh agent that is accessible called velocity. So we can determine if the agent has a velocity and then set the speed on our animator controller to that value and make sure that the animation is going when it's moving around. So I'm going to access that animation controller, and we're going to set float, which is our speed. And for the value of our speed, the zombie can move in the X and Z directions. So if the zombie is moving in either of those directions, we want the animation to trigger. So here I'm going to set the value to the velocity, nav.velocity. And then we have access to the X, Y, and Z, and we want to know if the X or Z is positive. So I'm going to add both of those together to get one float. Then we'll know if it's moving in either of those directions. And because the X and Z can be negative, I'm going to take the absolute value of each, which is mathf.abs, and add them together. And now if we go back to our scene, we should have an animated zombie, or the walk animation when he is moving. So now we have our walk animation. You can see he is above the floor by a noticeable amount, and that is one of the problems with the NavMesh. So for now we are going to add an offset to the NavMesh agent, and I'm going to set the offset to -0.1. And if we hit play, we can see the enemy seeking the player, and there's still an offset on the player. We'll have to fix that. But you can see, I believe he'll walk over cars. He will walk through these gaps, and any part of the NavMesh that you see in the editor, he can walk. He should walk up the stairs to come get us up here. So it looks like it's working for the most part right now. He should walk back down the stairs. And now we just need to instantiate each of the objects into the scene at the spawn points that we provided in the previous tutorial. And we have 3 spawn points if you remember. Going back to our game management object, we have a script there that has our spawn points. So here is our script from before. We need to add a reference to our zombie enemy, which we can include in the UI. Just drag and drop the zombie that we have into the script so it knows what object to spawn, and we already have our spawn zombie function. And I'm going to add 3 lines of code here, and we have one line that picks a random spawn point out of the 3 spawn points that we selected, and next we have our instantiate call. This will create the zombies at the point that we specify, which is the second field, and the third field is the rotation, which we don't really care about. So I just put the quaternion identity there, and we have the zombie enemy. That is our model that we're putting in. And lastly, we want to tell it how many zombies have spawned in the round, so we increment this variable here. And so when the amount of spawned enemies reaches the enemies that we set in the round, it will stop spawning. But this will spawn 10 enemies in our scene, and they will all follow the player. So now that we have our script, go back to Unity, and in our game management script, you can see the zombie enemy needs to be assigned. So in your prefabs, wherever you put the prefab, just drag and drop into that script. So now when we hit play, we have our one zombie that was already there, and we have zombies spawning at our spawn locations. Now we do have one spawn location up there. I don't know how that's gonna work. Looks like the drop is too far, so it won't be coming down, but he still spawns and he follows us around. So now we have our zombies, and one last thing I'm going to do is add a capsule collider to the zombie so that the player can't just walk through the models of the zombies. So if we go back to our prefab, I'm going to add a capsule collider and manipulate it so it fits the zombie character model. So that works pretty well. We have center Y at 1, radius 0.2, and height 1.7. So back in our scene, we can see that they're walking too fast. So we can change the speed on the NavMesh agent. So let's change the speed to 1, and they're still floating quite a bit above the ground, so we're going to modify the NavMesh capsule a little bit. And also, if you click on the navigation tab again, you can see that the navigation didn't line up with the map that we have, so I'm going to change the base offset to -0.15. And if you click on the navigation tab, you'll see that that lines up right with the top of where the NavMesh is. And the NavMesh isn't perfect, so there will be little bumps here and there, but for now it'll do well for what we're trying to do. And the speed is a little off, so I'm going to go back to my prefab and I'm going to set the speed to 0.6. And you just want to make sure that the speed is synced up so when they're walking it doesn't look like their feet are moving on the floor. So that looks pretty good. We have our zombies. We have our new animation controller. Got a bird outside. And we have our spawn point set up correctly. I will probably move the spawn point up here because those guys aren't going anywhere unless we added an extension to the ladder and the stairs. And just remember, any changes that you make into the scene, you will have to rebake that NavMesh. And in the next tutorial we're going to be adding our weapons so we can do some damage to the enemies. But that's it for this tutorial. If the video helped you guys out, be sure to like and subscribe. And thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.